You're listening to the King of the Fourth podcast, offering in-depth analysis on all things Boston Celtics, with your hosts, Jim and Mike Quigley.
Hey, our first season 4 episode of King of the Fourth Quarter podcast. I'm Jim Quigley. I'm with my brother Mike Quigley, as always. And the NBA Finals has concluded, so we're officially into the off season. And the Celtics have been active. The Celtics have brought in 2 new assistant coaches. Sam Cassell was the big hire, and what this means for Missoula's bench. We'll get into that. We'll get into the NBA Finals a bit. The Denver Nuggets beating the Heat in 5 and really controlling, almost all of that series. We're going to do a quick player review from last year and of the Celtics roster and what to expect going forward, and touch on the offseason a little bit, which includes, some interesting names that are all of a sudden available, including Phoenix, at least for now, Phoenix Suns point guard Chris Paul. Mike, why don't you kind of lead us off with whatever you want to talk about? The floor is yours.
Yeah. Congratulations to the Denver Nuggets. And I think it's pretty funny that Miami just forgot how to shoot the basketball after being lights out against the Celtics.
Yeah. Missed open ones.
Yeah. Caleb Martin, Strauss, their starting point guard, Vincent, just complete no-shows. And then Jimmy Butler, really not the same Jimmy Butler that we saw, but also credit to Denver, especially guys like Aaron Gordon on the defensive end and Caldwell Pope. Really wasn't much of a series at all. Never felt like Miami was ever going to win it. Maybe after game 2, there was some thought actually, but after they lost both in Miami, not a great NBA Finals, but definitely a great Denver team. And I guess the one thing you can take out of it as a Celtics fan is to try to remain patient, because Tatum's not at that age yet that the Joker's at. Tatum still got 2 more years to get to that same kind of spot in his career, that sweet spot where LeBron James won his first championship and now the Joker, and Steph Curry, that 27, 28 age range. So really these next 2 years you'd think would be where you want to see the Celtics get over that hump, especially, they're 2 years away before both Brown and Tatum are in the in their max contracts at the same time. But yeah, I think that's just a great Denver team that's going to be back next year, and they're going to be good for a long time. And they could be, they're the favorites for next year, and the Celtics are the second favorite right now. So, the hope is that they'll meet in the finals next year, but not a very entertaining finals. Watching the Joker play is awesome, but I didn't think it was a really great watch. I don't know what you thought, Jim.
Yeah, Miami 2-8 since they went up 3-0 on the Celtics. And the 2 wins, they shot close to 50% from 3 or better. And every other loss, they were nowhere near that number, with the exception of, I think, Game 5 against the Celtics, where they were just under 40% or at 40%. But so they were really a team that had to knock down their open threes. Even in the last 2 series, they only won 1 game where they didn't shoot that well, which was Game 2 against the Celtics. They only won, over the last 2 series, only won 1 game where they shot under 48% for 3. So they needed some luck to get to where they were. They're a gritty, tough team. That doesn't mean they didn't deserve it, didn't earn it. They absolutely did, but they needed some luck. And I think they ran out of it, really after Game 3 against the Celtics, and they were able to hold on in Game 7. Some fluky things happened, which happened in Game 7, and then, the Denver, talent won out, and Miami's kind of luck from range kind of ran out, and I think that was the series. Jokic was amazing. You hit on it. This has been like a decade in the making, this championship, in a lot of ways, or close to. Jokic was part of that smart draft, that Joel Embiid draft, and obviously a second rounder, and a year after that or 2 years after that, they pick up Jamal Murray and that Jalen Brown draft, and they kind of built out from there with some key free agent signings, great draft pick and Michael Porter Jr. And they built it through the draft and some smart trades and kind of lower level free agent signings to complement it. And they certainly had their playoff failures, whether it was because of injuries like last season or just really coming up short like they did in the bubble when they got swept by the Lakers. But they've stuck with their roster and they've stuck with their plan, and they continue to, make good, smart roster decisions. And then this season broke right for them. And they're a really good team, but the season broke right for them. And when you win a championship, you need a little bit of luck. Doesn't take away anything from what they've done, because every team that's ever won it needs a little bit of luck. And, they're able to win it out. And as you look at the Celtics, and, obviously the new CBA complicates things on how they can continue to move forward and build. But you kind of look at this Nuggets team and you think, okay, we have a pretty similar path with how we've built this current Celtics roster, based off of 2 high draft picks and, complementary draft picks. Rob Williams, you kind of got lucky on. You had Smart, Grant Williams, and others, and some smart trades and free agent signings that you think you should be able to be right there again and give yourself a chance. And they should. There's no reason to think the Celtics aren't going to make another deep playoff run next year. The question is, and you alluded to it, can the young players that been in the league for a while now, Brown and Tatum, continue to make those next steps and kind of get over this hump that whether it's the Eastern Conference Finals or the Finals last year. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what they do in this offseason, Mike, and how they move forward. But, the blueprint that Denver's on, there's not a lot to feel good about if you're a Celtics fan this season, but at least that can give you a little bit of optimism that you are on a similar blueprint. You don't have Jokic, obviously, but you do have high-end players that maybe you need to just keep going forward.
Yeah, my last comment about the NBA Finals is just that 2 years in a row, the East Conference Finals winner, the East contender, their best player didn't show up, and it's not good for TV when that happens, man.
No, it's not. It's not. And should be noted, like last year, where it was Wiggins, who was awesome in the finals defensively. Aaron Gordon was just fantastic. Really good. And it was tough as a Celtics fan to watch because, RJ Hampton was the player that Orlando chose over Aaron Naismith at the trade deadline 2 years ago, when the Celtics ended up with Evan Fournier instead. Because, a guy like Aaron Gordon, he certainly would have looked good in Celtics green based on what you've watched in these playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't they give up a first too, though? And I think the Celtics only traded second-round picks to Orlando.
Yeah, but they offered a first for it was a similar package, but it ended up being the Magic valuing RJ Hampton more than Aaron Naismith.
Oh, well, I guess whatever, right? I mean, it's not like either one of those guys are going to be studs.
No.
Well, yeah. So I mean, that's really that's all I have to say about the NBA Finals. As far as the Celtics right now, I think looking at that coaching staff and making some changes to the staff was important. It looks like they're trying to get some guys in there with especially Cassell, who has some playing experience and has been close to being a lead assistant for a long time. Has been talked about as head coaching experiences. Um, the coach from the Bucks. Sorry, his
Charles
name.
Lee. Charles Lee.
Charles. I was going to call him Courtney Lee for some
Yeah,
reason.
they hit the jackpot, Mike. Like in terms of who you wanted to bring in here, I don't think you could have ever thought that they were going to get both on their bench for assistants. Sam Cassell's been doing this for a while now, has been Doc's top assistant for a while, really is known as a great player development coach. Charles Lee has been a guy that's been a finalist for head coaching jobs the last couple seasons. Was actually someone the Celtics were considering before hiring Udoka. Is known to just be just incredibly upbeat, motivational. Another guy that is creative in his thinking with his player development, and it's going to be like the Udoka coaching staff is gone now. I think you can look at it that way, and this is going to be a new coaching staff with experienced voices on it, much more experienced voices than the Celtics had this past season.
But yeah, and I'm excited about it. I'm glad that they got these guys, but I'm still disappointed that who the head coach is. And I feel like, and I said in the last spot, so I don't have to get into it, but I feel like there were better options this offseason, and
the bench.
They might be on the bench. Yeah, and maybe the plan. I don't know. Maybe one of these guys are going to be the coach by the middle of the season next year. I don't know, but I don't have a lot of faith in this coach, so we'll just have to wait and see, how this all comes together. But it's really about the playoffs, and then the philosophy too, as far as are they going to get back to what worked under Udoka? Because I'm not a big believer in what drives Mazzulla's decisions, and it's really around the amount of 3-point attempts per game. And I think the Celtics take a lot of bad shots. And when you watch Denver play, just a lot of smarter decisions made on the offensive end, where just really reflecting about this playoff run, the Celtics just make a lot of bad decisions sometimes on offense that they don't have to. And somebody's going to get back in Brown's ear about his decision making, and just a lot. I don't know. I just feel like they live and die by the three, and that's not a recipe to win. That's a recipe to be entertaining and make it it kind of reminds me of like a Coach D'Antoni team. And you don't want to be the Houston Rockets or the Phoenix Suns. You're not going to win anything. You'll win a lot of regular season games, and that's it. Yeah,
there wasn't a lot of different ways to win this year. That was certainly frustrating. When they started missing shots, they would press and they would force action, and they didn't have like a gear to really come back and play different ways once they got down in a hole, which is unusual in the NBA, especially, nowadays where everyone comes back. And defensively, they were hit or miss. It wasn't a focus. Based on who they brought in, Doc teams, have been pretty good defensively over the years. And Sam Cassell has certainly been around a lot of great defense, going back to his Houston days with Hakeem Olajuwon. And obviously at the end of his tenure with the Celtics in that 08 championship. And then, he's been a part of coaching staffs that's put emphasis on that. In Milwaukee, obviously, and if you've gone back and you watched how the Harden and Embiid were kind of killing the Celtics in that pick and roll in Game 4, and then in Game 5, a lot of the changes they made were kind of similar to what Milwaukee did versus Philadelphia during the regular season. And so you have kind of similar personnel to defensively, even better than Milwaukee does in a lot of ways, with the exception of Antetokounmpo and Holiday. So, hopefully Charles Lee can bring some of that knowledge that he has over there. Now, are they going to have the same defensive philosophy as Udoka? I don't know. But you can be a good, deep, really good defensive team if you put emphasis on it with other defensive philosophies. So maybe that doesn't matter as much, just as long as they're committed to something, right? So
Yeah.
I think you'll see some of that. I think we gotta see what a full off seasons of a new coaching staff and implementing things and actually preparing for a season compared to having to do it on a fly with a brand new guy. But again, you could be right about Missoula. And you have two guys that I think would be ready to step in if Missoula falls on his face early in the season. And hopefully he doesn't, because that's kind of not a good sign. If we can transition, just because you mentioned his name, and I want to just kind of start talking about a little bit of the Celtics roster review and moving forward. You mentioned Jalen Brown, and obviously he's the biggest kind of name right now for this offseason, because that June 30th date is quickly approaching where he's eligible to sign that extension. All reports, I know Windhurst had one out there, is that this is going to happen, that both sides are moving towards it. It's happening, and it makes sense. But, and I know there was like an EEI report that he bought like this big place in the seaport already. So, I think the momentum.
That home's going to be on the water before the end of his contract.
Yeah. Well, who knows if he'll be here for the whole contract to see it anyways. I will say, so you look at that Miami series, and I know it's left just a terrible taste in everyone's mouth about, his performance. And well, it should, especially in that game 7 where Tatum couldn't do what he needed to do, and you needed your second star to step up and really do way better than 8 turnovers and a 1 from 9 3-point shooting performance and 17 points and forcing things. Unfortunately, against that team, he has just struggled mightily. And it was the same thing in last year's playoffs, even in the game where he went off points-wise, which I think was game 3 or 4, where the Celtics lost at home and came back. He still had like 8 turnovers versus them. And for the most part last season, he struggled against this team. I will say, in the first 2 rounds, if you go back and look, he was really, really good. He shot nearly 50% from 3-point. He was like 48% overall. He was over 50% from the field. If anything, there were times where the Celtics got away from him in games when he was cooking early, and they forced it too much with Tatum. And then in the Philadelphia series, he really took the mantle defensively and took on the Harden matchup when Harden was cooking them, and did a really good job of kind of settling the Celtics down. Now, in the next series, I thought everything fell apart. I thought his offense fell apart, and then I thought that bled into his defense, and it wasn't great. But I think we just need to keep perspective too. If to be fair, that this has been a guy overall that has performed in the playoffs. He's had 2 series that have stood out against the same team that he has not been good. But every other opportunity where he's had a chance to play and perform, he's been really steady with his performance, and he's been really good. And this is going back to his second season. So I know what we last saw is sometimes what we want to, hold on to. But it was a really good season for him. He's going to be back with this extension. And, the one major criticism I have on him, Mike, and I think it's fair and it's legitimate. You've played 14 games against the Miami Heat in the last 2 seasons in the playoffs. You played 20 against them in the last 4. By now, he should know how they're playing him. And if he wants to be the player that he thinks he is, and that I think he is, and I think most of the NBA world thinks he is, he needs to find a way to adjust. And he didn't adjust in this series until game 5. And that really hurt him, because maybe they're not in a situation like they are in game 7 if he realized that he needed to play this series against Miami differently than he would, say, Philadelphia and Atlanta. And as a guy that's battled with this team as often as he has, it's disappointing to see that he was not ready for it in this series.
Yeah, that was going to be my point. It's obvious that Jalen Brown's a great player. All team second NBA speaks to the regular season that he had. And as you mentioned, he performed well for the majority of the playoffs up until Miami. I think even in the first two rounds, there were things about his game that frustrated me, just personally watching him over the years. Even in the Philadelphia series when it was game two, he picked up Harden full court and like shut him down. Maybe it was 2 games later that Harden went off again. And, Brown was in foul trouble that game. But it wasn't so much his on the ball defense that would frustrate me. It would be his help defense that I always felt, and I still feel this way about Brown, is that he's just not reliable in that sense as a defender. We saw it during the regular season. I thought he got torched against Golden State in the NBA Finals last year. So little things like that frustrate me with a guy as athletic and as smart as he is, because to me, sometimes it is effort with him. There's not a full effort level that he brings to the table, even in the biggest moments. And that's actually like a recipe for the entire team, especially this season. So it's not just him. And what I'd love to see from Brown this offseason, and I'm sure it's something that he's thinking about because he seemed really distraught after Game 7. Like you see his interview, he just seemed like a guy who was beat up and like almost like he let himself down with his performance. So I'm sure he's coming into this offseason wanting to get better. He's going to become a better ball handler. We talk about this a lot. And he's got to become a better decision maker. I think I've said this before. When you're as talented as he is, I've never been on a team where I could be relied on as a basketball player like he can be. But what I can sympathize with is when pressure is kicking in and you feel like you're the person, it may seem unselfish to want to try to take over the game and not pass the ball to your teammates or make the right decisions. That you want to go into hero ball because you feel like it's the best thing for your team. And we saw it in Miami. I think we saw it against Philly a little bit too, where he would do that. And he would just make horrible decisions on the fast break where he wouldn't pass it to the open man and he would go like 1-on-3 or 1-on-4. So there's really, as much as we've seen him improve over the years, I think there's areas where he can still get better. And as much as I enjoyed watching him on the ball with James Harden defensively, I think as an overall defensive presence, and if he can buy into the fact that he's never going to be Jason Tatum on this team, that's never going to be his role, that he really should be buying into that Scottie Pippen role as much as possible. He should be an all-world defender on the defensive end, on the ball, with ball pressure, off the ball, with help defense, and not just waving an arm, but actually getting out on shooters, running players off shots, stepping in to take charges. These are things he doesn't do.
Yeah.
And maybe he's not going to be the kind of guy who steps in and takes charges, but Jimmy was lazy a lot. And we saw it last year too, especially against Golden State. And
I thought he was their best player versus Golden State.
On the offensive end.
Yeah, and I don't think it's fair to...
Well, he got torched by Klay Thompson.
I don't know.
I mean, he did.
I think you're being overly critical based on what happened in that last series. And I think he deserves all the criticism in the world. But against Philadelphia, he was... When Tatum was a no-show for most of Game 6, it was him and Marcus Smart that kept him afloat. And his defense, I never questioned his defense in that Philadelphia series. Maybe, I'm not watching him as intensely as I need to off the ball, but I thought, he was really good. I thought he
For
was.
a guy as good as Jalen Brown, his focus in effort isn't always there. And that's, to me, that's just the truth. His focus and his effort isn't always there on both ends of the floor, and it tends to turn into selfish basketball.
I did not see it outside of the Miami series. Again, I just did, like, those first two series. I did not see it. I did not see it most of the season with him. I think you're right. As a team, they lose focus and they don't bring the effort collectively, and they deserve criticism for that collectively. But I don't know. Like, I thought first Miami was awful. I thought I saw the fast break stuff that you're talking about, where he go 1-on-4 and he forced things and it was not there. And I thought he was terrible and he let the team down. I thought in the first two series he was really good. And I think there needs to be improvement. He's not a good off the ball defender, and his defense has slept the last couple of seasons. There's no doubt about that, and he can get better, but I don't know. I think over the course of his career in the playoffs, outside of this Miami series, he's always shown up.
All right. So what do you want to talk about next? Because we're not going to agree on this. I'm really, like, I'm going to have to see him play again next year to get my confidence level back up in him and Tatum being able to win a championship together. I think there's a lot of things I'm concerned about as far as the two of them playing the same position. Just watching Denver, it felt like it flowed better with the two guys that they had. I just have some concerns. I think Brown's a great player. I'm starting to wonder if he's the fit for this team to get to where they want to go, unless he buys into the nitty-gritty stuff that you need out of your number two guy, as far as doing some of the hard stuff that I don't know he wants to put the effort in to do. That's what I question about him. Here, anyways. But we'll see.
I don't know. Like, they've gone very, very deep into the playoffs. They've come up short. Certainly, I don't think the reason they've come up short is because Tatum and Brown play on the same team. But I think we saw each individual player come up short in the last two series. They've been eliminated at different times. Tatum clearly was not himself against Golden State, and I think that severely cost them. And then Brown not being able to perform at a better level hurt them in Miami. I'm not sure that's what cost them the series. I think you can point to other things that were larger factors in why they lost versus Miami. Unlike against Golden State, where I really think Tatum was the number one factor why they went down. But
yeah, you got to get over this Miami thing too, because, like, who's covering them when you think about Miami? Because for the majority of that series, they had Jimmy Butler on Tatum. So I remember looking at the Miami series pre the struggles. So going back to the bubble, like looking at that series when we going into the bubble, like they have nobody that can cover Jalen Brown.
Well, they're physical, and they get low hands, and they're very disciplined, and they stick to the scouting report against him, which is forcing him left and then go for the steal, and he just keeps feeding right into it.
Yeah.
They're very smart and well coached, and it really has made him struggle more than any other player on the Celtics. And he has not performed well against the zone either against them. So I think it's a lot of it is mental against Miami. And that's why, I said in my criticism that, you have 20 games where you could have figured this out, and you haven't. You have not. And I think that's a fair criticism of him. I think some of your critiques are fair. I don't want to go down the road where I'm going to say, he's come up short effort-wise over and over again. When I see his production in these playoff series over the course of his career, which have been really, really good, really, really good, with the exception, again, of the Miami series, are the ones that stand out. The other ones have been good. Does he need to get a little bit better defensively? Sure. Is it as important if the Celtics have a good defensive scheme and are more committed like they were last season? I don't know. But I'd like to see him be able to mentally handle some of these challenges than he has. And, I know he's a smart guy. Being an intelligent guy off the court doesn't always translate to on the court. And I think there's been some moments here that we've seen, particularly against this Miami team, where he has not got over mental blocks on how to, attack things. And on the flip side of that, we've seen Tatum in series be able to flip the switch against teams and see how to attack things. We saw that against Philadelphia, starting at the end of Game 6 and then going off in Game 7. And I think that's kind of the biggest difference between these two players, is that eventually, within the course of a series, Tatum's going to get it and figure it out. Even against Miami, first 3 games, the fourth quarter, Tatum doesn't score. And then the next 3 games, he kind of really has a handle on how to kind of match up against a lot of these defenses that Miami's throwing at him. Brown, it's a little slower there. And, you've seen this against this one individual team that has given him fits.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked about it before. They're not going to trade him now. So
no,
but they got to figure this out. They have to figure this out within the next 2 years for this to work.
Mike, we're running out of time. I want to ask you a couple questions, and we can do players. I think the Brown discussion was important, so I'm glad we did it. Quickly, so I got something wrong in the last pod where I said the Celtics had to make a decision this offseason. They actually don't. They can run it back before the penalties and the new CBA really start hitting them, and they're into that second apron. That's really boring podcast talk. How would you look at this offseason, though? Would you start preparing for future seasons and try to move on from one of your bigger contracts now? Or are you looking to do everything you can to win a championship next year and maybe run it back with the crew that you have, knowing that it might make things difficult, down the line for you if you do that?
It's a mix of both. I'm going all in for next year, but I think you always look at your roster and see. So I'm going all in for next year to win a championship, because if you don't, that's stupid. They have to. But it doesn't mean you have to bring back this entire team as well. I think that I would take a look at these 3 guys and see if there's a way to bring in a player that might fit in better. And see if I can sell high maybe on a Malcolm Brogdon. But I would go right after it again.
Yeah, I think I would probably look to move a player too, because I think you can still be right there if you lose one of these guys, and then maybe you can retain Pritchard or you bring in someone else. It doesn't make you better, though. That's, there's not a lot of trades out there that you're going to make for either Brogdon or Smart, and what you get in return this offseason, I think is really going to make you a better team. And maybe I'm wrong there.
I mean, maybe the players that aren't as talented, but they fit in better.
Yeah, that happens sometimes, right?
Yeah. Mm.
So you'd have to go out there and see what teams can find. And I think a trade like that would probably happen, not late into the offseason, but probably after the first round of free agency wave.
Yeah.
They're in a tough spot there for sure. And I think I'd want to make a move now. Because otherwise everyone next season is going to know why you're trading, and your return's going to be even less. and that could hurt you for future years down the road. But at the same time, I sit here and I think, Christ, if Malcolm Brogdon was somewhat healthy in that Miami series, how much of a difference does that make when this offense completely faltered?
Probably a big difference.
And what does that mean for next year? And then at the flip side, I'm thinking Brogdon's never stayed healthy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
What are the chances that he's going to be there when you need him again? So,
and I think the other big thing that's looming is what's going to happen with Grant Williams.
Yeah.
I don't know if Missoula actually values Grant Williams. I think it's obvious that he doesn't from the Athletic article and the way he was used. So my feeling is Grant Williams is gone.
Yeah, and if you're a team, right, that has a little bit of cap room, and in that first round of free agency, you don't get any of the unrestricted guys that you want, right? And you're a team like San Antonio or Orlando or Charlotte, there's teams with cap room. You could structure a deal that the Celtics just can't match based on knowing what that second apron is, right?
Yeah.
So, because of the new CBA now, you kind of got the Celtics cornered where you can give him a deal of $15 million and know that the Celtics can't match it. And he's a good 3-and-D guy. Maybe if you're San Antonio, you're thinking with Wemby coming on, that he's the exact type of guy you'd want to sit in the corner and be able to defend guys to give Wemby a little bit of break on that end. So it's an interesting situation where he could, if you were talking to me last offseason, I'd say the Celtics match that without a blink of the eye, but the new circumstances, they probably don't. So I think the odds on him returning are less than 50-50.
Yeah, me too. And it really means that Muscala and Gallinari are going to have to be able to play next year.
Yeah.
I think over time, if guys play, they're gonna get better. They're gonna settle in. We'll see them adjust and play well. But there's also an opportunity. Maybe there's somebody in free agency they can bring in because Al's another year older here, so the Celtics are gonna have to address that. I think some sort of another big this offseason that you can rely on a little bit in the playoffs would be helpful.
I'd love to see them draft that at 35, a developmental big.
I
could shoot a little bit and defend. You've seen bigs kind of go late in the draft that have been good year or two after the draft.
Look at that kid who just played in Detroit this last season. What was his name? Duran?
Yeah, Duran. Yeah. And obviously, even going back, Jokic was picked. You're never going to get a Jokic, but Jokic was picked then. Nursev, whatever his name is, from Portland, was picked in the second round. So you can find bigs then, and I think that'd be a good developmental one. Last piece, Mike, Chris Paul. Your thoughts? Most likely going to be a free agent looking to go to a contender. Any way you could see him here?
No, I can't see him here. And the reason I can't see him here is because as much as where the chatter is like Chris Paul needs to play for a contender, Chris Paul has always needed to get paid.
Yeah.
And the Celtics can't pay him anything.
And he's like that. I think he's the head of the union too. So it's significant that he takes the best deal money wise.
Yeah, I think he values that more than winning sometimes. So
which is criticism, by the way. If that's what you want, go for it.
I don't know where he fits in here either. They would obviously have to move some guys around. I don't know if I'd want Chris Paul either. I'm not sure, Jim. Chris Paul is one of those guys when the moments get really big, he's not really present. He has really great regular seasons and he gets you far, but he has a history of not being available either due to injury or like OKC in that game 7 a couple of years ago in the bubble where he just completely lost it down the stretch. So I'm not a huge Chris Paul guy. I don't know what your thoughts are. I think he's maybe a fit to go back to the Clippers if they can somehow get him. I'm not sure where he ends up.
I'm not sure where he ends up.
I don't think if I'm the Miami Heat, It's not Chris Paul. I'm doing everything I can do to get Damian Lillard. So Chris Paul would be my second choice from Miami. Chris Paul doesn't get me over the hump. Damian Lillard does. So I don't think Chris Paul ends up with the Heat either. I think Lillard does. So I'm not sure where he goes, where he's going to win a championship.
Yeah, it's always interesting with Miami. They're always involved in every trade rumor. They're going to have the same kind of cap issues because of Bam and Jimmy Butler's contract and Lowry's contract. I don't know, how they make some of these trades they say they're going to. I guess they can try to figure it out. And Dame would be a good fit there, but he's getting paid $50 million. So
yeah, you'd have to trade Lowry.
Yeah, I don't know how they
Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, and a boatload of draft picks. I would assume
they don't. I don't think they have a boatload of draft picks either. So good. They'll be in on the effort. I heard they're involved with Kyrie. Go for it. Let's see what that.
Oh my God! Talk about blowing up your franchise.
Yeah, your Heat culture that you talk about. But yeah, as far as Chris Paul, you would have to move on from one of your guards, and then he'd have to, you can't offer him more than the mid-level exception, which is $5 million. So that's what he would have to take. And
so they still have the mid-level this year?
They do.
They should go after Josh Richardson.
But I don't think they use it unless they get rid of one of their guards.
Yeah.
It opens up money there. I just don't see them using it. I do wish they used it on Bruce Brown last year instead of Gallinari. I won't go back down that road, but he was fantastic. Good for him. Boston-born Bruce Brown playing a significant role in the NBA Finals, especially in the closing game. But as far as Chris Paul, so that it would just be mid-level, and then he'd have to accept that, and you probably have to be rid of Brogdon or Smart. You're going to hear a lot of you need him or a guy like him for the end of games. Things are not going to change at the end of games until Jason Tatum accepts that he needs to play through a point guard. Marcus Smart would be fine controlling the ball at the end of games, but Jason Tatum is going to have to accept that he's not going to run through him all the time, and you can't walk the ball up and just barely get it over the half-court line before you get an 8-second violation and start running the offense then. So it needs to come from Jason Tatum.
Yeah.
In order for that to change, Chris Paul is not necessarily going to change that. So if they move on from one of their guys and they signed him, that'd be interesting. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think he's going to be here.
If the Celtics really want to mix things up, a guy that I would keep an eye on, and a guy that they could move Malcolm Brogdon for, and they probably would have to make a secondary move with Marcus Smart because he'd be bringing in a true point guard. So it'd be a big decision. But I like Mike Conley Jr. He's in his last year of his contract. He defends. He plays really hard. He's a really smart player. I think he brings something different than Brogdon brings. I think Brogdon is a better player overall, especially scoring the basketball at this point in his career. So I'm not sure. I think Minnesota is looking to mix things up big time with that roster. So I don't know if that's a possibility, but I think Mike Conley, if he came here and was your starting point guard, would be something that I would be really excited about.
I don't really know what that does for Minnesota, though, because they're not.
I guess it gives them a better player.
Gives them a little bit better player,
Yeah.
but he's injury prone, and he's got a couple of years on their contract where Conley would.
But Minnesota's stupid.
There's that. Yeah.
Or Jimmy, maybe this is crazy. Is Mike Conley a better fit than Marcus Smart? I don't know. Because Marcus Smart's a great player, but
I don't think so. Yeah, I know where you're going with this, but I
think Conley's a better shooter, spot up shooter anyways.
But I think I think that's the only skill that he's better than Marcus Smart at right now in his career.
Yeah.
I think Marcus is a really good point guard. And again, it's not going to change the end of game situations unless Tatum agrees that it's going to change. So
yeah, and I wonder too, though, is it? And that's where the Chris Paul factor probably becomes attractive to people. And I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but is the thought process that Tatum's not going to change unless he respects that level of player. So, like, is there a different respect level to Chris Paul that he would have than to a Marcus Smart?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like they got to change the way they play at the end of games. Maybe Sam Cassell can get that through to him. Obviously other assistants and other coaches haven't.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a key thing. If you want to improve on something each and every offseason, that's it, right? How he approaches the end of basketball games. Maybe Chris Paul does help with that. I don't think he's coming here though, so I don't think it's really a realistic solution. I know Mike Conley isn't going to change that. So no, I wouldn't. The only way you justify the Conley for Smart deal is, and that would be one that I think Minnesota would be very interested in, is because you could get out of Conley's contract after this season.
Yeah.
But you would be worse. You would be worse in terms of unsure how many games played you're going to get. You're going to be worse. He's not as good a point guard as Marcus Smart is anymore. I know sports radio won't agree with that, but that's the truth. That's the reality. He might be a better spot-up shooter, which I'm sure he is, but I think that is the only skill at this point in Mike Conley's career that he'd be better at Marcus.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's still a very high-level three-point shooter. He didn't lose that, but
and Marcus Smart was really good in the playoffs this year. Like, if you go back and you look at Derek White, Marcus Smart, and Rob Williams, when he got his minutes, were probably the most consistent playoff players.
Yep.
Yeah. And
I agree.
Marcus Smart was not a problem for you this year at all.
Yeah. I think I'm just playing around with that Brogdon contract because I'm kind of fearful of it, and I don't know how much I trust him to be healthy. I think he was super valuable all season. Obviously, I think he was huge in the Philadelphia series. His offense, his defense. Obviously, we got on him about his defense, but if they didn't have his offense in that Philadelphia series, we might be talking about them not winning in the second round.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's a shitty thing about this whole thing, Mike, is that your trade for Conley is a bad idea in a vacuum. But because of the position they're in, maybe you do make the smart trade and you get a draft pick out of it and you live with it. And you come back. But it stinks.
The other team, I think he's available. Isn't Harrison Barnes going into the last year of his deal?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what you would be looking for if someone can give you an expiring back. That would be more than I would expect you would get. So that would be, I think that's ideal. What you would look for, what you'd want is to get an expiring back, and you can send them to a team that, isn't gonna, be in the tax penalty.
Yeah, teams are in tough spots. Like this new CBA, you look at it, almost like every contending team is over the tax. It's are very close. I was reading an article about Atlanta, the Hawks. They're trying to move Murray, just because of money.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the idea is to make it be more like the NFL. We can talk about this on other pods. But I think the Celtics window is these next 2 years because of this. They got to win now.
Yeah,
they really do.
I think there's been more parity now than there's been in a long time in the NBA. And there was the other thing is that really sucks about the CBA. There's no runway it's next season. You better fix it this offseason because next season you'll be screwed. So you've been building a team based on the last CBA, and there's no runway to kind of get out of it. It really does suck. I don't think it's good for the game.
Owners desperately trying to sell their team, so.
What's that?
I think you're going to end up seeing some owners desperately trying to sell their teams.
Oh, I don't think so. Why do you think that? The value of these teams just go up and up and up. They're making money hand over foot.
I'm thinking a team like the Atlanta Hawks might be an ownership thing. Because it's going to be hard for them to move some of their contracts that they have with this new CBA, and they're going to be a middling team paying into that tax.
Yeah, I think they're gonna. I think whether it was a new CBA or not, they probably had to look at how they were building their team at some point with the new coach. But I don't think, I don't think.
Yeah, if you look at contracts in Atlanta, like they're terrible. I wouldn't trade for any of them. Murray's the only guy I would trade for.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't trade for Collins, that's for sure. But Mike, hey, I gotta run. I gotta go do something, and I'm running a little late as it is. After the draft, we'll be back and we'll see where the Celtics are. And there's always a little. That's when the noise and rumors really start too, and that's coming up in just a little week. So we'll talk to you soon.